I'm going to read 3 poems from a book called A Presentment of Englishry, which was published by Shearsman in 2018. A Presentment of Englishry was a legal process from the late 11th, early 12th centuries in England. If a dead body turned up near your community, and that dead body happened to be a murdered Norman or Frenchman, then your community was punished. To avoid being punished, you could prove that the dead person was English, in which case there was no fine, no punishment, because English people weren't that important at that stage. And it seems to me that it might have been very straightforward to prove someone was English in the 12th century, but today if somebody asks you, are you English, it can be quite difficult to think of how to answer it, or to even know what it might mean to be English. So the first poem I'm going to read is actually called A Presentment of Englishry, and in it the speaker is answering the question, are you English? And that is a question which in my experience is never neutral.
Mum chancing it, while the question takes a hike past dark satanic mills and pleasant enclosed pastures, where we do tug a forelock as milady rides to hounds, us folks below the stairs do know our place. Strained in the underground while bombs fall overhead, we stood our ground at Ethandun, Stamford Bridge and Senlac Hill, then bartered, buggered, battered, ground into the soil from Agincourt to Waterloo. We fell in well-drilled rows, in some slime, screaming there is a corner of some foreign field that is forever foreign. Smashed, scorched and sunk for Drake to Jellicoe. Hatred handed down amongst the people we defeated, and we reviled by those we did the fighting for. Prosperity rode misery to market, past sullen tenements, street maggot urchins breeding in the gutters, while the gin-sunk stench of slack-jawed women at the gallows, slumping towards oblivion, transported not to joy, their menfolk beaten dogs looking anywhere but up. By what grounds English? West Midlands, aye. Not mercenary prat, a Mercian, of Penda's folk. Ye hearst thou?
Although A Presentment of Englishry contains 2 long stories, it's also broken up with shorter pieces, and the pieces I'm going to read now are 3 stories from Gerald of Wales. Gerald of Wales is one of the most fascinating characters of the 12th century, and he set out on a journey through Wales. It was actually a preaching expedition to raise interest in the Crusades, and he recorded what he saw and heard as he went along. He was obsessed with collecting stories, and he tells them in The Journey Through Wales, which is one of the reasons why the book is still so readable today. So here are 3 stories from Gerald of Wales' Journey Through Wales.
He stepped out into unobstructed wind, shut and barred the door, half dragged, half carried the defeated child towards the parapet. His fumbling hand felt stone, felt for the edge and end of stone, found space. Footsteps on the stair pounding at the door, a small crowd in the courtyard pointing to a blind man and a child on the castle's highest tower. The castellan was pleading, "Give me back my son," and demanding to know how the prisoner had escaped. Blinded and castrated, for a reason no one could remember, he'd been there so long he'd been allowed to grope his way around. No one thought he could be dangerous. "Give me back my son, my only son, my heir, and I will set you free." "Castrate yourself," the blind man raged. "Castrate yourself, or I will toss your son, your only son, onto the stones below." The gathered people saw the blade descend and groaned. "You've done it?" called the man. "I have." "Where does it hurt?" "In my groin." "You lied." The blind man moved the child closer to the edge. "Wait!" screamed the Lord. "This time." The people saw the blade and groaned again. "Where does it hurt?" "In my heart." The blind man held the squirming child over space. "Wait!" The blade descended. The Lord bellowed. "Where does it hurt?" the blind man called. "In my teeth," the gasping castellan replied. "Now you will never have another child." They thought the boy screamed, "Father," as he fell. The blind man leapt into the wind, 2 bodies scattered on the stones. A monastery now marks the spot. It's called the Scene of Sorrows. Number 2. On the night of the storm, the hunter took refuge with his horse and his dogs in the church of Laîsmon. A foolish and irreverent thing, writes Gerald. Welsh and Irish saints are so much more vindictive than the French and English version. By morning the affronted saint had driven the dogs mad and made the huntsman blind. Although he did penance and prayed for forgiveness, his sight did not return. Cf. Vindictive Saints above. Hoping for a miracle, his friends helped him to Jerusalem, a red cross sewn onto his tunic. Armed and mounted, they pointed him towards the heathens' battle lines. He charged, was cut down, and died with honour. Number 3. On the first night, he dreamt he put his hand in the hole beneath the gushing spring and pulled out a golden torque. 3 nights, the same dream. After the third, he arose, walked a mile to the spring, and put his hand in the hole. A snake bit him and he died. Dreams are like rumours, writes Gerald. You need to use your common sense.
My last piece is called Laľamon Remembers Ireland. Henry II had problems with his sons, and one of his problems was the young Prince John, who, when Henry split up bits of his empire and handed out to his other sons, John didn't get anything. And Henry hit on the bright idea of giving John Ireland. And so he sent John to Ireland on an expedition, and he sent Gerald of Wales with him. And the reason we know about John's expedition to Ireland is because Gerald wrote it up. I decided I was going to send Laľamon, who's the first named English poet after the conquest, along with John and Gerald to Ireland. And so this poem is called Laľamon Remembers Ireland.
To Ireland with John, not then a king, as a clerk in the household of Gerald of Wales, that lover of bad puns and sordid facts. Write it down, boy, write it down. Frustration cruelling his humour even then. What price intelligence on the open market? Behold, Christendom's most scintillating intellect, lacking a bishopric, tutoring the Lackland, who is a very different kind of prick. We were there when the Irish lords came in, like creatures from the dark edge of a fairy tale, whose heroes danced on the spear points of their enemies, howling defiance at the overwhelming host, experts in the night raid and torched thatch, who cared nothing for title deeds, who counted their wealth in well-fed cattle, whose country rolled like the melt of their syntax, and is as unknowable as that barbarous tongue. Expert thieves of other men's wives. Write it down, boy, write it down. Despised by Gerald. Loose-living fornicators, Christians who don't know Christ or his church. Afraid of nothing except the blistering tongue of their poets. Baffled by the brutality of castle walls. Unarmoured, no match for a knight in an open field. But God help that grey rider if he chased his bare ass into the mist, into his bogs and forests and hilly places. Then his armour would become a rusting shell for the breeding of maggots, his head a guest at his enemy's feast. And John, who didn't need to shave, laughed and pulled their beards and mocked at them. Killers who didn't need to purchase Flemish muscle, who would have stabbed him where he sat, then fed him to his dogs. He laughed at them. The Irish lords, insulted, faded into mist, perfecting their resentment. The Anglo-Normans retired to their castles to practice disappointment, because God knows in later years they'd live with it. John and his lackeys getting hammered, safe behind walls, Gerald making puns. Taxes raised to pay for knights, wasted on knights. Money raised for arms used to raise skirts. Not my best, boy, but write it down. First Lackland, soon soft sword, then names no Christian would inscribe, betraying his father, then his brother, offending allies by stealing their bride, then losing the largest empire in Christendom. You taught him well, Gerald. Write that down.
So there we have it, 3 poems from A Presentment of Englishry, published by Shearsman Books.